I really found this weird, fascinating world where it's sort of like real world real estate. I kind of compare it to like real world monopoly, where you're buying and selling, if you want to, these properties. I kind of compare them to internet real estate versus real world real estate. So I started researching those and getting into the buying and selling of domain names. And that kind of took me to where I am now, to some of these odd projects.
Coming up, we're talking a really interesting way to build a business with Peter Askew, who is a domain name investor turned dude ranching, ranch employing, and onion farmer. The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with the Modern Acre, be sure to check out our membership community, the Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Local Line. Local Line is the all-in-one local food sourcing platform for restaurants, grocers, and distributors. Use Local Line to discover and buy from thousands of family farms that sell every kind of product category, including produce, meat, dairy, and more. Whether you're a single location, independent grocery store, or a nationwide chain, Local Line helps retailers of all sizes build scalable farm-to-fork supply chains. To learn more about how to source local with Local Line, visit their website at www.localline.ca or click the link in our show notes.
Ty, we are recording this the Friday before the Super Bowl, so we don't know how we're going to be feeling next week. We could be overjoyed, super happy, or we could be in a state of despair and hangover.
Yeah, I think this was a good mental health decision. Get the intro, outro complete before we know the results. Because if they win, we would be annoying, and if they lost, we would be really sad. So I think this is very wise.
Yes, we'll delay the commentary on the Super Bowl until next week.
Yes. So for those listeners who are just so interested in getting our analysis, there's like 3 of them. But guys, we are so excited for this conversation. Tim, this was awesome talking to Peter, who doesn't have any background in agriculture and farming at all, but has, for kind of random reasons, gotten into agriculture and ranching. And he is a domain name investor. He's been involved in tech his whole career and just has this really interesting approach to, instead of start a business from scratch, acquire a domain name that can basically give you a head start in running and growing a business.
Yeah, he's such an awesome story. He's super active on Twitter, but we actually found Peter on Reddit of all places. I was going down a rabbit hole researching something and came across this post about a guy selling onions online, and it turns out to be Peter, and talked about his story buying Vidalia onions. So we get into that on the podcast, but just an awesome story. He spent his early career in startups, working early on in the internet, and kept getting laid off and just wanted to start building. So he didn't have to be reliant on the W-2 job. So he began coding and investing in domain names. And that turned into a career in agriculture and ranching now. It's a super fun conversation with Peter. So let's jump in with what's top of mind for him.
Top of mind is the Vidalia onion crop right now. We will probably start harvesting in April. We did the transplant maybe 2 or 3 months ago, so we're mainly monitoring the transplant from the seed beds into their permanent home until they grow. And then we have a lot of rainstorms coming through right now in the Vidalia region, so we're monitoring those to make sure mainly hail, sleet, or snow rare, but sleet and hail is something that they were monitoring. So that is top of mind for us right now, monitoring the crop to make sure it's nice and happy.
We were just talking before we pressed record that you've done a number of podcasts, but no ag podcasts. And crop health being top of mind is very appropriate for this podcast. So,
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah. And I would have never, that's what I love about this industry so much. I would have never understood that aspect had I not tried to build one of these. And now it's funny when I watch the weather reports. I'm in Savannah, but I move in between Vidalia and Savannah. I see a big rainstorm coming through. I'm like, oh gosh, what's in that rainstorm? Is there any snow, or is it? Or what is the temperature dropping down to? Is it dropping down in the teens? We don't need it in the teens for 2 or 3 days straight, because that may hurt these seedlings coming through. So a very different perspective that I have adopted over the years.
Totally. Well, Peter, let's take a step back. I would love to just learn more about your story. How did you get to Vidalia Onions? What was your early career like? What led you to here?
Yeah, I sometimes say I'm a .com reject from the late 90s. I got into the .com startup world, and I was in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and fell in love with the internet. I never realized that you could actually have a job working on the internet and actually earn a salary playing around on the web. And I didn't have a background in coding or graphic design or database. I had a background in history from a college in Mississippi called Ole Miss. But once I just dipped my finger into the web, I could not let go, and it was a very strong pull for me to stay in the web. But I went through the growth and the decline of the web, so I went through just multiple layoffs, layoff after layoff after layoff. It was disheartening, but I knew I still refused to accept jobs in other industries, because I was still, a lot of people after the first bust in the early 2000s, everyone was saying the internet was a fad and it was going to go away, and I refused to accept that. I was like, no, there's no way on earth this thing is going to go away. So I stuck with it and eventually got back on board and started working at other companies. I did a stint at Auto Trader, the car marketplace. And then I got another job and started getting into the advertising side of the web, how to promote products and services, how to track that traffic to see if that actually converts into a sale, spending money with an advertising outfit, tracking the traffic. Did it convert? How much did I make? Did I cover my advertising expenses? Did I cover my cost of goods sold? Is my head above water? And then taking another baby step forward. But at the same time, I still had this paper cut of being laid off every single time. So as I was working at these companies, I knew the writing was on the wall. At some point, they're going to lay me off. Maybe they wouldn't, but I'd been burned so many times. I'd been conditioned in some way to understand they're going to lay me off at some point. I need to figure out a way to save myself, because they, in some ways, don't have my back. I need to figure out a way to save myself. And what I just realized, looking back on it, was like I was basically prepping myself just to become some sort of weird entrepreneur, just to be able to come out and be able to support myself with some of these odd projects that I try to start. And so when I started getting this understanding that I needed to save myself, I began teaching myself how to code so I can build my own websites, coding. And then that morphed into a little bit of graphic design, and then database, and then it dovetailed into domain names. And that's where I really found this weird, fascinating world where it's sort of like real world real estate. I kind of compare it to like real world monopoly, where you're buying and selling, if you want to, these properties. I kind of compare them to internet real estate versus real world real estate. And you can buy and sell. And what TLD extension or top level domain extension do you prefer? Do you prefer .com or .net or .org? Which is the most easiest for the consumers to remember? That tends to be .com. Everyone tends to default to .com. It has kind of a trust and authority that's baked into it. So I started researching those and getting into the buying and selling of domain names. And that kind of took me to where I am now, to some of these odd projects, and started monitoring the expiration world on domain names. So I'd buy a domain at expiration. Somebody may have abandoned it. And when a domain is abandoned, it goes back to the registrar. The registrar will put it up for auction before it's re-released out into open registration. And there is a weird, unusual, just misfit world of all these domain investors nowadays, me included, that scrub these lists looking for interesting opportunities, either to buy and hold and maybe try to flip. Or for me specifically, I like to buy them and use the name as inspiration to build some sort of product or project. And that tends to be nice generic domains that don't infringe on any trademark. And VidaliaOnions.com being one. It expired. Somebody abandoned it and it went up for auction. It's an odd one. I was monitoring it, and being a Georgia boy, I knew about Vidalias. I was randomly bidding on it at auction and thought it was going to sell for $5,000 or $6,000, and I threw in a bid around $2,000, and then no one else bid, and there was crickets, and then I actually won it, and I didn't know what to do with it. But it wound up becoming a fun project that ends up being one of my projects that supports me these days. And I don't want to talk too much and go down too much of a rabbit hole on Vidalia, but I have 3 or 4 projects, and oddly, they all sort of revolve around ag, ranching, agriculture, and even a little bit of adventure travel within the ranching world and the dude ranching industry.
Wow, what an awesome story. I've never really talked about domain trading before, so to hear how you came about Vidalia Onions is super interesting. Let's maybe dive a little bit deeper on that. You lock up this domain name that you think might be valuable. You grew up, or you're in Georgia, Vidalia Onions are a thing. You lock up the domain name. Like, what are your next steps? Do you just want to sit and flip it, or do you think like I could create some interesting business?
A great question. I was upset at myself first for buying it because it was $2,200 that I did not have at that point. And so I just threw it on a credit card and then used I believe at that time I was still working a 9 to 5. And so I'd come home in the evenings, work, build projects and sites and see which ones may gain traction. And that one was a curveball. So I paid for it and then tried to figure out a way to get it paid off as soon as possible. And then so I ignored it for maybe 3 or 4 months. Didn't pay attention to it, focused on other projects that were generating revenue for me. And then would go into my 9 to 5 job and then come home. But it kept lingering. It kept sitting around. It's one of the rare domains that has ever just slowly just needled me in a very positive way, just needling me every day. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was like, why is this one domain of all the domains that I've bought continue to like linger in my head? And the association that kept popping up was there's a outfit, I believe they're in Oregon, Harry and David, and they ship those pears every year, and they have really good, they're Comey's pears, but I think they name them something different. They're an exceptionally sweet pear, extremely good. And I order them each year, every other year, and they're quite good. And the idea that kept popping into my head was, well, who's doing that for Vidalia? Who's sending Vidalia? Vidalia is a pretty boutique little item. You can only grow them in Georgia. They're very seasonal. So if you order, you need to get, there's built-in scarcity because of the time and the area. You can't grow a Vidalia in Texas and call it a Vidalia. You can call it a Georgia sweet onion, but you can't call it a Vidalia. And so I was like, ooh, I like that unfair advantage. I like unfair advantages. So I like domains as an unfair advantage. I like this region that we live in that you can only grow and call a Vidalia if it's grown in this specific region because our soil is so low sulfur. It's been, almost compacted down so low in the soil. Some of our fields look like beaches. They're so sandy. It's fascinating. So my head kept going, well, who's doing that well? Who's really focusing on that market? So I was like, well, is anybody searching for that? So I'd check Google and they, there are a lot of tools where you can check search volume online to determine, okay, is anybody searching for this? I always do go back to search engines because it's such an interesting avenue where you don't have to guess where someone is actually actively searching for a product or service. You can go ask a search engine and you can ask them, how many times do folks search for the term Vidalia onions? Or you can even get more granular than that. How many times does somebody search for buy Vidalia onions, order Vidalia onions, or Vidalia onions near me? And so I could look at the search volume and say, that's a sizable amount. That's a fairly, now what do I assume? Maybe I convert 5%, 1%, 2% of those people, maybe. That's intriguing. That seems to be a small enough market. Then I kept watching chefs online. I'd watch Bobby Flay. He has so many different YouTube videos where he's just preaching about Vidalias, and he'd have a recipe and say, okay, you need sweet onions. I need to look at the camera, and he'd say, if you can get a Vidalia, get a Vidalia. If you can't, you just get a sweet onion. It'll be just fine. You can that'll be just fine. But if you can get a Vidalia, it is the caviar of sweet onions. If you can get it, get it. And I was like, man, there is is not just a sweet onion. It is this cachet between this interesting onion with a very loyal following, which I liked as well. So I decided at some point, after about 3 or 4 months, I was like, this is interesting enough. I was like, who is doing that? I looked online. There weren't many farmers really focusing on farm to door. They preferred a big 50,000 pound order that they'd load up in a tractor trailer and ship off. And I understand why. It's a little bit of work to focus on onesie, twosie orders versus a single order for 50,000 pounds, and you get a big fat check at the end of the day. So not many farmers were focusing on it. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. I'm just dumb enough to try this type of project, maybe, but I have to have a good onion. How do I find a good? I can't ship these things up to Atlanta and package. I was living in a condo at the time. It's like, they'll kick me out of the condo if I ship them up here and load them into my condo. How do I do this? And so I ended up doing enough research and discovered they have a Vidalia Onion Committee that represents all the Vidalia farmers. And so I reached out to them. At the time, I think I was driving through to Florida. My parents were in Florida. So I was driving through and I cold called them and just said, hey, I was trying to make sure they knew I was the good guys because I own the name of their industry. And some folks might take that as you have to be kind of careful just to make sure to let them know you're one of the good guys. I'm trying to help serve the industry, and how can I work on this? So I was trying to position it as that. Hey, my name's Peter. I'm passing through. I'm a web developer. I'm trying to see if there's ways I can serve the Vidalia industry. I happen to own this domain, VidaliaOnions.com. There's actually a trademark on it, so I sort of needed their blessing as well to use the name because I want to protect the name from anybody, in Texas, anywhere else that is trying to use the Vidalia name. And so they were intrigued that I was a tech guy trying to figure out a way to work on this. So they just invited me down. So I drove down, met in their offices, and eventually they started driving me around to Vidalia Farmer and just started introducing me to Vidalia farmers that might be a good fit for this farm to door concept. We had discussed it when I got down to their offices. They were calling it mail order. I was initially kind of quizzing them, just saying, what do you guys see as opportunities in this industry? And they kept saying mail order, mail order. No one's really focusing on mail order. I was like, okay, well, that's internet. That's just taking an order over the internet, figuring out a way to process it, get UPS or FedEx involved. I was like, okay. But at the same time, I was like, are you just buttering me up? Because that's what I was kind of suggesting. And then I do all this legwork and I'm making 5 sales a year or something, and I can't keep it afloat. But we decided to go meet some farmers. And so they introduced me. The third farmer I met was Aries Haygood. At the time, it was M&T Farms. He's changed it to A&M Farms, just the initials. And we hit it off. He got it immediately. He has a marketing background, so he got it. He was like, okay, I see this. I can understand. He operates a packing shed, and he's the farmer as well. So he's a grower, packer, shipper. There are some Vidalia outfits that are just grower, packer, and they're done. And they don't ship, or just growers, and they'll just sell their whole crop. But he's grower, packer, shipper, and has packing shed, and has climate control. So he's been a perfect partner for me. And on top of it, just a stand-up guy that he and I have just become friends over the years. We've known each other 10 years now. We've been doing this project. And I was a stranger off the street coming into him. And I say it a lot, that a lot of this is based on him taking a risk on me, a stranger coming in from Atlanta, the big Atlanta guy coming down into farming territory, and him trusting me to represent him through the website and represent his operation. And my pitch to him was, hey, we'll give this a shot. Worst case scenario, you're going to be able to get to use this great domain, and I'll build you a website for free. So there's nothing off your plate. I'm going to build it. I'm going to use your name, and I'm probably going to use your likeness because he's done a great job from a PR standpoint. A lot of the TV stations in South Georgia use him as a reference if they need to interview somebody about the crop. They'll drive into town and interview Aries. So I was using him, and so we kind of partnered on the site, and then we were roughly just guesstimating. I've never been big on trying to hit goals. I try to work with nature because you never know what your crop's going to be like. But our first year was like, we wondered, like, what could this thing possibly do? And we're like, hey, it'd be neat if we got maybe 50 orders our first year. That'd be pretty cool. Out of nothing, coming onto the scene, getting 50 orders, that's pretty great. And then at the end of our first season, we had 600 orders. And then him and I were looking at each other like, holy cow, this is pretty cool. This is actually working. There's a little bit of work involved with it. There are lots of things that we can fix for season 2. And so that's what sort of started it. That's a long, short story of how it all eventually started. And then every year, just keep iterating. We were doing almost everything manually the first year. From the order would come in, I would get the order in Atlanta. I would put the order in a shared Google sheet that I'd already trained the staff at the packing shed to open, and they would manually type the order from there into the UPS terminal. And they had their own thermal printer at the packing shed. Then it would print out one label, and then they print it and take it off and go put it on a box and ship it. But since then, we moved over to Shopify. Shopify integrated into ShipStation. We start the season, I'll get thousands of orders. I had a couple buttons, and my thermal printer is right there, and it'll start spitting out orders, which is great. So but every year at the end of the first season, I was like, I've got to automate this. We cannot do this manually next season. No way, no how. So I got to figure out, and thank goodness, Shopify ShipStation, integrate that, and then I can hit a button within ShipStation, and it'll go through and start creating some of those orders for us. Yeah.
All right, man, so much to digest there. What an awesome story. My brain is exploding currently. So we have a ton of follow-up questions for you on this. So I would love to hear about like recent growth and how you guys have continued to grow demand here. But maybe you can start with like, how did this partnership, if you're willing to share, like, how did you structure this partnership? Was this some sort of like profit share arrangement? You go to this farmer and say, hey, I got this domain name. I can help drive traffic to the site. So there's, driving demand to him. Like how did you guys structure something like this?
Yeah, so technically I am under the farm's wing. So like over everything, I sort of consider myself a subsidiary. So and then I also sometimes call myself the CTOO, the Chief Technical Onion Officer, just to give myself some weird or dumb title. So Aries and I have like it's basically a revenue share. Order comes through, Aries gets a cut, I get a cut, UPS gets the biggest cut out of all of it. And we made that decision early on to include shipping just to make it easier. I don't know if you guys are like me. When I order something on the internet, if it costs $20 and shipping is $25, for some strange reason in my head, that seems to rub me the wrong way. But on the flip side, if the product is $45 and shipping is included, it's just a little bit easier pill to swallow. And so I was very adamant on trying my best to include shipping, one flat rate for coast to coast. And that has helped, in my opinion. And we can see it in our sales. It's helped just to have one flat fee. If you're in California, Texas, Idaho, anywhere, it'll get shipped. If you want it shipped to Alaska, we can. It's an extra $200 or $300, and it's happened several times. Canada's a no-go. It's just we tried to ship one up there, and it got stuck at the border for 3 weeks or so, and then it got there a little late. But the onions were still good. It was just way too much red tape to get through. But yeah, just honestly, Aries and I being just creative, just to make, because the first couple of years was like, I don't need this thing to make me any money. If we can just prove the thing works, then Aries and I can take a step back. Okay, how do we make this work? Are we having fun doing it? Number one, I'm pretty much a stickler on that. Are we having any fun? Are we solving any problem? Are our customers happy with this? And each was like, yes, yes, yes. I really enjoy working with Aries. He's got a great family. His packing shed's wonderful. And I selfishly, I enjoy learning off him because he's my little mini mentor, because I learn everything about the industry through him, because I take all of his knowledge and then dump it on our customers.
So for Aries, we've talked a lot on this podcast about farmers being interested in exploring a direct-to-consumer model, right? Like it's a very common discussion. Yeah. And often it's very hard to execute just because the amount of resources it takes to get something like this off the ground isn't, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? In many cases. Like, so for Aries, how did he manage like the farm and the direct to consumer? Was the bulk of his product going to a large buyer, and then this was some portion of the demand was coming this direct to consumer via the website, and then that's grown over time? Can you kind of speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. So his primary business is, direct to like grocery store chains, food brokers, millions of pounds a year. I'm coming in and I am just a little layer on top because I'm in our early days. When we were growing a little bit, I'd always hang out with Aries and drive around with him. And I was like, Aries, what, if we grow too fast, do I need to, how are we going to try to approach that? And he's looking at me laughing. I was like, Peter, if we grow, I'll just grow another acre of Vidalias. It's no big deal. Just don't worry about it. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess you could do that. Okay. And he said, we have enough inventory going through that I'm small, but when he's selling to the brokers, he loses that connection with the customer. And I'm paying him significantly more. The money that we make through direct to consumer is significantly more than he makes through a typical price you sell to the brokers, 30 to 50 cents a pound, maybe 60 cents a pound. So we make a little bit more, but it's more legwork. It's more hand holding in a good way with the customer. Make sure the box lands there. Did the box get lost? But yeah, so his primary and still his primary. So there's some interesting aspects of it. His primary business is the onion, but he also has climate control. So he can climate control and store other farmers' Vidalias in his climate control warehouses. So you make a little bit of revenue stream off of that. And then web, me coming in as web, where I take all of the web off of his plate. He doesn't have to worry a single thing about anything. Domains, hosting, advertising. My old world was also SEO, paid search, analytics. So I take all of that off of his plate. I just want him to focus on just growing an amazing onion and running his packing shed. I want to be the little mouse in the back, just working and eating my cheese and then just bringing him a check. Every single in season, I just come and bang a big check and then working as best as I can with the packing shed crew to make sure our boxes are going out on time and that they're landing at our customers' doors in a timely fashion. But a majority of his time is focused on the crop itself and then the operation of the packing shed, making sure that packing shed is moving in season.
Yeah, it's a super interesting point. Like Ty said, I think a lot of farmers are interested in direct to consumer just because they can be more profitable and charge a higher dollar when you're going direct to consumer and eliminating kind of that retail distribution point of things. When I look at crops that we grow on the farm, we're growing watermelons and garlic and kind of higher value specialty crops, and still the return back to the farm is 20 to 30 cents a pound. So kind of in the range that you're talking about for onions. So definitely appealing for farmers to be able to level up and capture more of that farm dollar that gets talked about. Peter, maybe talk to us about how you've driven demand to the platform. You started with the website, like were you just going on Google Ads? Like how did you build demand and kind of like what's the current scale today?
And I'm glad you brought that up because any farmer I think can work in a few of these avenues. And sometimes it seems, well, this is the lowest hanging fruit and it can sometimes get ignored because some folks may think it's so old school, but it's been one of my best assets is number one, email, capturing email addresses from customers. Social is fine, but man, if you have their email address, that is the gold standard because you can reach out to them one by one. Social networks are fine, but social networks, as what I've seen, I think most of other folks have seen, they can strangle your reach and start charging you hefty amounts to try to reach the folks that are already following you on that channel. Email is different. If you have a direct email, I have 12 or 13,000 email addresses for Vidalia. So I can hit a button here probably in a week or so. I'm going to send out our pre-order notification and I can send it directly into their inbox. And I'll have, based on email, I'll have a almost 100% land rate. And then 40, 50, 60% will open, click right through, and then hopefully a purchase. Email address is just insanely, and which is interesting on our crop because we're seasonal. In my off season, in season, my homepage has a big green button says, order Vidalia onions now. And then that goes over to Shopify and I capture the sale. Off season, it's, hey, sign up for our priority notification and we'll send you an email the moment that we're accepting orders for the Vidalia onion crop. So I collect emails. Anybody comes to my website, it's built on WordPress, it's nothing fancy. I have an email capture form. I capture their email. They are indicating to me, please let me know when you are accepting orders this year. That could work for any farm. Let's say you have maybe your corn crop or watermelon, or you have cattle that you're selling. Let me know when you're officially selling. If someone physically visits your farm, get a notebook and just let people write down their email address and say, I want to be notified if you have strawberry picking or peach picking. We even consider doing onion picking during our season. The harvest is such a short time period, but we've considered it. It'd be fun to allow people to come out and pick your own Vidalia onion. That'd be kind of fun. Emails has been a blessing for us. Social channels are great as well. A little bit of SEO and paid search, buying terms like Vidalia onions, or within paid search, if a farmer is maybe near a big metropolitan city, you can geo-target specific terms for maybe a big city that's nearby. If you notice that folks from that main city visit your area a lot, you can target your specific term, maybe strawberry picking. Let's use that as a good one. You can target a paid search campaign within Google or Bing or any search engine. If somebody searches for the term strawberry picking within St. Louis and your farm is in the rural part of Missouri, you could say, hey, we are only an hour away. Bring your kids and you can do strawberry picking and we'll give you a bucket and it costs this. And we also have this other fun. Maybe we have a lot of them add some of those extra features like the, tractor rides or XYZ. And you can kind of layer on different ways to monetize some of that crowd that's coming out. Paid search has been great. Email, paid search are great ways to start. SEO is good. It's more of a marathon project from an SEO standpoint, but very, very worth it to get a little bit of exposure to it. I tend to be the type of person that gets to about 80% proficiency in things and then stops and goes to the next thing. I don't need to be 100% proficient. Like 80 is just fine. I can do enough damage by getting close enough and then downshifting into something else. So I'm sort of good graphic designer. I tend to be better at paid search, SEO, analytics. I'm okay at email, okay at writing. I like to write maybe just as a brain dump. It's fun. I like taking photographs. I like taking video. That's fun. We're even testing from Tim, from a YouTube standpoint, we're testing out our YouTube channel. So we're filming our entire grow process for the Vidalia crop. And we're at about, I think, 200 little subscriptions, but I think that's a fun channel just to show, face to the actual operation. This is an American farm growing Vidalias, and this is us. If you're placing an order, you're supporting Aries and his family. Watch us as we, grow this entire crop. But yeah, so we've enjoyed the YouTube. I'll probably go over here and probably next week to film a few more episodes, but that's been helpful as well. But email is a great one, is a really good one to start on.
And Peter, so are you these projects now? There's a few other that maybe we can fit in here. So are you doing this full time now, or do you still have a 9 to 5?
Yeah, full time these days. So I have Vidalia is full time, and honestly, a lot of the reason I have multiple projects, it honestly comes from my days of being laid off so many times. I almost want multiple safety nets in some ways. It's very similar to a farmer. Aries growing similar to what you were saying, Tim. He grew in our off season. He's growing a little bit of corn, a little bit of watermelon every now and then. The primary crop is Vidalia, but he has a few other crops he's cycling through just to keep the packing shed busy and to have a little bit of extra revenue coming in. So I'm very, very similar. I have multiple crops, multiple websites that I'm operating, sort of oddly in a similar world. I don't know if I told you guys this. I just recently acquired the domain organiconions.com, which I'm very, very excited about. And Aries and I are going to investigate how to build it because it allows us to stretch our wings outside of the Vidalia industry to bring in any kind of onion, sweet, yellow, red. They come out with some of those pink ones, Peruvian that are coming up through the Savannah port. And we have all the infrastructure. And all we need to do is pack and ship. If we can grow that out, we're very curious to see how that one might go out.
You have onions.com and organic. How did you get those? What did those cost?
Onions.com, that was a few years back. Another investor bought it and they thought they'd be able to flip it to me for a whole bunch of money. And at the time, I poo-pooed it. I didn't want it. He wanted to sell. He bought it for, I believe, around $18,000, the original purchaser. And at the time, I was like, no, I sell Vidalia onions. That's a whole lot different just from Onions.com because I sell a boutique product here. And so I poo-pooed it. I said, no, I don't want it. And I essentially was his only buyer. So he bought it thinking I was asleep at the wheel when it was up for auction. So he bought it, immediately turned around to me thinking he was going to get a quick sale. I told him, no, I'm not interested. He sat on it for a year or two trying to sell it at other marketplaces. It was only getting offers of like $6,000 to $8,000 or so. And then I had a few of my domainer friends. I have a friend who owns bobbleheads.com of all things. And he's north of Atlanta, and he similar built a business on the bobblehead industry. And he took me aside at a conference one time, was like, Peter, I know you think you got a boutique product here, but this is one opportunity where this name comes up once, and you're in a window of time where this domain is available, and whoever buys it next, you're never going to own that domain again. If you are interested, just use some profit from 1 year and then figure it out later. Maybe you'll figure out, but just take that chess piece off the board and then figure out what to do with it later. And then I slept on it a couple nights. So I was like, he's right. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I didn't know what I was going to do with Vidalia when I bought it. So I was like, let me just buy it. So I got him down to around $14,000. So I bought it for around $14,800, I think. And today we just use it for like a landing page. Aries mainly uses it for his email. So he's Aries@onions.com. And that is its primary use. And that may be its perfect use. And he's told me over the years that it's a perfect conversation starter for him when he goes to conferences by himself. He'll go up and like, Aries, what's your email? It's like Aries@onions.com. And he says 100% of the time, it's always followed up with, hang on, how? What? What's your email? How did you get that name? It's like, I know a web guy. He's one of my guys. And I love being the guy behind the scenes. So we got that one just buying it direct from somebody who was trying to sell it. Organic onions expired. Crazy. Just recently, 2 or 3 weeks back. I couldn't believe it. I'd never thought that one would come on the market. It went on the market. I thought the domainer crew was going to bid me up to $5,000 or $10,000. It only sold for $2,000, $2,100. So I bought it for about $2,100, and I just used profit from previous Vidalia seasons. I don't know where that one will go, but I think it has some interesting applications for us. If anything, we'll try maybe a similar vein, maybe trying to ship. I don't know if there's as much of a pull for organic being shipped. My gut would tell me there is. But a lot of these you only know if you just test it, try it, build it, and see if you can serve that market. And Aries has built a pretty strong network of a lot of organic onion growers around the United States. It's a very strong group. So we already have the packing shed. We already have climate control. He already has a very strong network of the exceptional organic onion growers. And Aries is moving his operation to be almost as close to organic or 100% organic in the near future. So we're moving in that direction. So I liked, honestly, just taking that chess piece off the board. But those are kind of three that we're focusing on right now.
Worst case, if Aries is in an organic farming conference, he can give his email as Aries@organiconions.com.
He could. Yeah, I haven't set that up yet, but he could. Yes. I'll set that email up eventually.
Peter, we love talking about business ideas on the podcast, and you are big on trends, looking at domain names that you're locking up. Like, what are you looking at in the future? Are you actively looking for new domains, or what do you think the trends are within that space?
There are a lot of new, they call them TLDs, top level domain extensions. So there is a .farm. I'm a .com guy, and I mainly try to educate folks that these are fun to buy and utilize. I do not recommend any other domain extension other than .com, mainly just from a user standpoint. I sometimes preach about this on Twitter, that the .com name has been sledgehammered into the general public's mind since 1995 through billboards, TV, radio, internet, everything. Folks default to .com, regardless if your name ends with .co, .net, .org. They're going to hear everything you say up to the dot and ignore everything past the dot and just type in .com. And it's so weird. I've seen this happen where I've told people to visit something .org. They'll ignore the .org and type in what I first said and then just add .com to the end. So in some ways, on some of these projects, I try to lean into that, into the trust and authority that's sort of baked into some of these good generic domain names. But the top level extensions are intriguing, but I sometimes buy them and just redirect them back to my .com. If I want to take another odd chess piece off the board from a .co or a .io, I'll buy it just for kicks and giggles and then just redirect it back to onions.com, vidaliaonions.com. But it's because the friction I've found of trying to educate the general public that .io is a domain name extension versus me educating them that, hey, we are A&M Farms. We ship a really good Vidalia onion. You really should try it. We'd love to share some of these with you versus spending that same amount of time saying IO is an extension. You should try it. It's a weird CCTLD that represents the Indian Ocean. There's some island over there, and then they're lost, and I'm talking about the Indian Ocean versus Vidalia onions. I like taking the easy way out. Focus on the .com first, and then use its trust and authority and kind of leverage to back into certain business models, especially ranching and farming. But .com all the way.
We started the Modern Acre with the modernacre.co because .com was not available, and we locked up .com. It just became available like
a
year or two later. So we snapped that up. So
good for you.
Yeah, we had to get the .com. So now,
did you redirect .co? Did you redirect .co to .com? Make sure you're doing that.
Yeah, .co goes to .com still.
Okay,
so we still own both. So all that redirect is happening, but it has made our emails quite complicated because we have both .co and .com, but we had so many emails and history with the .co, we kind of maintain that. So it is a little bit of a mess, and that's why your advice is good advice of start with .com, and it's a little cleaner that way. Well, Peter, we're running out of time here, but I want to spend just a minute or two here. You also have some other interesting projects. So I'm going to do dealer's choice here. You just highlighting, one of Dude Ranch, Guest Ranches, ranchwork.com, maybe the most interesting story that you could kind of share in the last few minutes here of one of those businesses.
I wrote a blog post about this, but I'll talk about ranchwork.com. So it's a job board essentially for ranching, but it also bleeds into the agriculture world. So if anybody needs extra help, this site just eclipsed 100,000 visits for the month of January. So it draws a significant amount of folks who are hungry for work. And I oversee 100% of the site. And it's essentially meant as just a boutique job board focused on smaller or really any size rancher or farmer. And just because it's called ranch work doesn't mean it can't serve the ag community. But one of my favorite job posts on there was, it was submitted through as a paid listing, and it was a more tourism job. It was somebody to help out a tourism crew that helped lead tours down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And so they'd load up mules, load up all the supplies, and they'd help people go down. And one of the requirements was must ride mule to and from work location. And I don't know why that one made me smile and laugh that, this is part, because I come from the technology world where it's, you got to know PHP and MySQL and graphic design and SEO and paid search. And then I get these good, just down to the earth, like you must ride mule to and from work location. I was like, yes, this is the way it should be. You should be sticking your hands in dirt and getting outside and stepping away from this computer screen and touching grass and being outside. That's what this little tool that we're using should enable us all to do. I don't think we're meant to sit behind this computer at all day long. It's meant to be a tool to get us outside, to go on maybe mini adventures or to serve or to work the earth or work in the ranching world. But that one always kind of maybe laughing. It does make me feel good. I love that aspect of that world where it's more, hands in the dirt working versus, sitting more sedentary at a computer.
That's awesome. Well, this has been a ton of fun, Peter. As we wrap up here, how can our listeners get in touch with you and connect with Vidalia Onions and order a box of your 2024 crop?
Yeah, sure. So we are at VidaliaOnions.com. If that's a mouthful, you can just go to onions.com. I have a big button on there. You just click Vidalia and go over. I also have a button there for our holding page at organiconions.com, which I would anticipate we may try something maybe in the later part of 2024 after the Vidalia season wraps up. We may try something maybe November, December. If anybody wants to submit their email there, for early notification on organic, I would expect we may try sweet onions first, possibly, and then maybe yellow, red, possibly. But I'm active on Twitter. I hang out there. So I'm at Searchbound, SEARCHBOUND, and I tend to share any aspects. I post a lot of onion photos if you like onion photos in the field. Or videos that we're capturing, or any other aspects of projects that I'm building from ranch work or duderanch.com or VidaliaOnions.com on how to kind of build on unique domain names, how to find them, locate them. I sometimes share expiring domains that I stumble across because I can't build them all. So I'm always looking at them, and often the overflow I just share on my Twitter feed. For anyone else to potentially, like Beach Blanket was one that actually expired recently. If anybody is interested in trying to find other small businesses to dip their toe in to see if there are communities to serve out there.
Tim, did you or did you not immediately after this conversation begin researching domain names? Be honest.
Yes. Within 2 minutes of recording this podcast, I was on my phone on expiring web domains, trying to see if there was anything ag-related that we could pick up. Was looking at California Garlic, was looking at organicmango.com. There's a couple leaders in the clubhouse, Ty, but I think we might need to get in some domain name invest in. We call organicmangoes.com, so nobody bid on that one.
Yeah, love what Peter's up to and trying to order some onions for the upcoming season. So be sure to check out their website. He has everything that they're working on his website. We'll link all the domains in the show notes so you can check that out. But appreciate you guys listening, and we'll be back next week with our official Super Bowl analysis.